Andrew Jackson's Indian policy. By the time Jackson became president, only 125,000 Native Americans still lived east of the Mississippi River. Warfare and disease had greatly reduced the number of Indians in the east. Others had sold their lands and moved across the Mississippi. One of Jackson's goals was to remove the remaining Indians to a new Indian territory in the west. Most of the eastern Indians lived in the south. They belonged to the 5 groups called tribes by the whites: the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole. Hoping to remain in their homelands, these Indians had adopted many white ways. Most had given up hunting to become farmers. Many had learned to read and write. The Cherokee even had their own written language, a newspaper, and a constitution modeled on the U.S. Constitution. Whites called these Indians the 5 civilized tribes. Sequoyah was a Cherokee Indian who developed an 86-letter alphabet for the Cherokee language. The alphabet contained both Roman letters and symbols that Sequoyah created. In spite of the fact that these Native Americans developed what many whites considered an advanced civilization, wealthy planters and poor settlers were still determined to force them out and seize their lands. While the 5 civilized tribes may have hoped to live in peace with their neighbors, whites did not share this goal. As the Cotton Kingdom spread westward, wealthy planters and poor settlers alike looked greedily at Indian homelands. The Indians, they decided, had to go. The Indian Removal Act. In 1830, urged on by President Jackson, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. This law allowed the president to make treaties in which Native Americans in the East traded their lands for new territory on the Great Plains. The president wrote this letter to the Creeks, hoping to persuade them to move willingly. Friends and brothers, listen. Where you are now, you and my white children are too near to each other to live in harmony and peace. Beyond the great Mississippi River, your father has provided a country large enough for all of you, and he advises you to remove to it. There your white brothers will not trouble you, and you can live on it as long as the grass grows or the water runs, in peace and plenty. The land beyond the Mississippi belongs to the president and no one else, and he will give it to you forever. Some groups agreed to move west voluntarily. Others resisted, usually with tragic results. This was true of the Sac and Fox of Illinois. Led by a chief named Black Hawk, the Sac and Fox fought removal for 2 years. Black Hawk's war ended in 1832 with the slaughter of most of his warriors. As he was taken off in chains, the chief told his captors, "Black Hawk is an Indian. He has done nothing for which an Indian ought to be ashamed. He has fought for his countrymen, the squaws, and the papooses, women and children, against the white men. The white men came year after year to cheat them and take away their land. You know the cause of our making war. It is known to all white men. They ought to be ashamed of it." The Trail of Tears. Many whites were ashamed. Washington was flooded with protest over the treatment of the Indians. Still, the work of removal continued. Thousands of Creeks who refused to leave Alabama were rounded up and marched west in handcuffs. To see the remnant of a once mighty people fettered in chains and forced to depart from the land of their fathers, wrote an Alabama journalist, is of itself enough to move the stoutest heart. More than 17,000 Cherokee were dragged from their homes in Georgia and herded west by federal troops. 4,000 died during the long walk to Indian Territory. Those who survived remembered that horrible journey as their Trail of Tears. A soldier who took part in the Cherokee removal called it the cruelest work I have ever known. Led by a young chief named Osceola, the Seminoles of Florida resisted removal for 10 years. Their long struggle was the most costly Indian war ever fought in the United States. A number of Seminoles were finally sent to Indian Territory, but others found refuge in the Florida swamps. Their descendants still live in that state today. When Jackson left office, he was proud of having solved the Indian problem for good. "I feel conscious of having done my duty to my red children," he said, but in reality, he simply moved the conflict between Indians and whites across the mighty Mississippi.